It is the end of July, which means it's time for a reading recap. It also means that my focus on Canadian reading is over. Obviously, I will still continue to read Canadian authors when they come across my TBR and my vibe reading. But we're done with that focus for now. I am sad to report that the two novels that I read this month are, yeah, you can come up, buddy, are mediocre. Now, it was probably time that I was gonna read some mediocre books because I feel like I've been having great, uh, a great go of it, reading a lot of really good books. There have been like a couple this year that have been kind of like, threes, 3.5, but a lot of really good ones. So, it's fine. Not everything needs to be a banger. They weren't bad books by any means, but they are in the 3.5 range for sure. Before we go any further, hello, I'm Jerica, and I'm an editor, writer, and all-around content creator, and this is my July reading recap. We're gonna discuss the two novels that I finished. I didn't do any short stories this month, technically, but I am judging Writing Battle this month, and next month it kind of, goes over about like a 6-week period. And so I have been reading a lot of very short stories. They're 100 words this season, but I haven't read any short stories as far as TBR short stories go. Okay, let's get into it. So the first one that I read was Under the Ribs of Death by John Marlyn. I think my biggest issue is that the story told is not the one I expected. This is not really a fault of the novel, it's a fault of the cover copy. And I feel like I've been led astray a couple times by cover copy, and I think that that's really terrible. From like the publishing standpoint, from the publishing viewpoint, from the... And it kind of sucks for authors. Obviously, this book is, real old. This is probably even a reprint. And so, like, this might not even be, I believe it is, this might not even be, like, the original cover copy, but the cover copy led me to believe that there was going to be an obvious blending of cultures, because the story is about, a young Hungarian immigrant, from, like, childhood up until he is a grown-ass man, and rather than getting any sort of blending, what we actually get is a dichotomy. The difference between our main character and his father. His father is very socialist and still, trying to keep up with Hungarian tradition. And then his son, even as a child, is really striving to assimilate and get away from what his father thinks and becomes... That's a spoiler. But like his viewpoint and his beliefs are the stark opposite. And we very rarely see him enjoying anything that has to do with the old country, if you will. And so I feel like I was led astray, and that was definitely like part of the reason that I didn't enjoy the book. Now, it's not the only reason I didn't enjoy the book. I think that this book could have benefited from a different editor or an author who worked with an editor a little bit more closely. Again, this might be like the preferences of the past versus the preferences of the now. There are some things that people are like, oh, always get rid of that from your manuscript, like certain words, like get rid of all of the filter words, get rid of all of the adverbs. There's lots of these, like, things out there that are kind of said as ultimate rules, and I always say that there's always a reason to not follow the rules. However, I could have gotten drunk playing a game where I took a shot every time this author used the word suddenly. Not only is it, like, not a great word, and like I could go into detail on that if people are interested, but that's definitely getting more into the writing than into the reading of things. But also just the repetition of the same word. And this is something that like I don't pick up on. Uh like it's something that I have to like focus on while I'm editing. It's not something that actually stands out to me in writing very often. Idea repetition stands out to me more than word repetition does. So there were a couple other things like just like some like poorly constructed sentences that I didn't love. There were even some typos, which again, like I usually just like I'm like whatever, I don't care. Like typos make it through. But just because like there were so many little things in the writing that kind of like kept like catching me off guard. I did notice that the writing quality could have been better. Now, all of that being said, I still think there's an interesting story told here. I do think most people would absolutely despise our main character. I don't have a problem hating the main character if I understand their motives, and I do understand our main character's motives here. Yeah, I think it's still an interesting story. It is very much still a story about being an immigrant in Canada during the Great Depression. And that actually that's another thing is obviously this is set up to be a very like racial story. And it's not that it doesn't touch on race, it definitely does, but it does feel more class focused. Obviously, there is very often a huge intersectionality between those two things, and so it makes sense. But again, like it was just I was expecting more about culture and less about class. Like I didn't realize this was going to be about class, especially since I don't think it mentions. Yeah, so it's not even mentioned in the cover copy that it happens during the Great Depression, which I think would frame the story in a very different way than it is framed. Now, if I were to like look at dates and stuff, I might have been able to guess that that's when it was going to be told. But I just think that that was probably an important piece of framing. I think my favorite parts are very early on, still during his childhood, uh, and like discussing the neighborhood he grew up in. I think that's my favorite part. Because obviously he lives in an immigrant neighborhood, which is also a poor neighborhood. And I just think that like it does a good job of framing a story. I don't know if it frames the story that ends up being told, but I did really enjoy the action and the neighborhood culture that was explored. Okay, that one's done. Under the Robes of Death by John Marlyn. The next one that I read, I didn't put the. I'm not gonna get it. I didn't put the dust jacket back on. But the other one was Hitman by Julian Sher and Lisa Fitterman. This one, I'd never read true crime before. I listened to true crime podcasts. I watched true crime, YouTube videos. I've watched documentaries. I like crime fiction as well. But I'd never read it before. So this is my first true crime book. So I do think that maybe some of the things that bother me about this book might be genre conventions, and it's something that like if I go on to read more true crime, I might just have to get used to. The main thing that I think might be a genre convention is reminding you who people are every time that you mention them. Um, and like I understand the logic for this. Like it was bothering me, but then I like thought about it and I understand why, I think, and I think it's because nonfiction books can and often are used as reference books. So if somebody goes to chapter 12 because they know that that's covering like the events that they're currently researching, they need to know, or like it might be useful to know how all of the characters are connected to like the greater picture. But the amount of times that it was like so and so, someone who was present at the Lennoxville massacre. I'm like, okay, I get it. I've been reading it front to back. But lots of people aren't reading nonfiction books front to back. And so it like, because I read so much fiction, it felt like not trusting the reader. But I have to remember that this is journalism, which just has a very different purpose and style. It was just like, I was like, I get it. I know who that was. The other thing is actually interestingly about framing. So this story or this novel, this book, is titled Hitman, Canada's Deadliest Assassin. The untold story of Canada's deadliest assassin. And so it's supposed to be about Yves Apache Trudeau. And it is about Yves Apache Trudeau. It's definitely focused around him, but there are large pieces that are following other gang members, and like it all leads back to him, but I feel like the framing almost could have just been like the growth of Hell's Angels in Montreal. Because one of the things that Yves Apache Trudeau did was help found the first chapter of Hell's Angels in Canada in Montreal. And so like a lot of the story ends up like going back to the fact that like he is a founder, and so like it's there's just like a lot about like the history of Hell's Angels in Canada. And like most of the stories end up like including him. I think actually where it starts to kind of like fall apart in my mind more so, and again like I can give a lot of leeway here because it's still centering around him, but by the end we're talking about every time that Yves Trudeau goes to court to like talk about like to be a witness for the crown against like other bikers. And so we end up getting like the whole story of what the other bikers did. I don't know. It just felt like they're I guess I guess what I was expecting was more about the individual murders, because there's 43 of them. He confesses to 43 murders. And I don't think we really know about them. We don't know a lot of the details about them, but at the same time, like, I think a lot of the true crime that I have consumed up until now has been about, like missing people, murdered people, focused kind of like on the victim and the circumstances of that particular thing. And so this is a very different piece of media, focusing on one criminal and all of the things. Although, you think about like a serial killer and you get the same thing, but you get a lot of the details of the crimes. And I think there just aren't a lot of details of the crimes, because the details of the crimes are like Trudeau planted a car bomb. Trudeau shot some guy. Like, there's not really, like, anything to, like, figure out, I guess. I guess that's what I was missing. This is, like, a telling, whereas I feel like a lot of the true crime that I listen to, we kind of, like, work our way through a mystery, if that makes sense. Like, all of the steps leading up to the capture of. So maybe this book just, like, wasn't for me. Maybe this is, like, too journalistic, rather than being like a creative nonfiction storytelling, because that's like another, like, I found it was so repetitive. Like, it would give the details of like the Maisonneuve bombing, and I'm like, okay, like, I get it, I've read about the Maisonneuve bombing, I know who died in it, I know who did the killing, and so it's just like, I found it repetitive, I think, is the biggest issue. If we were to like drop it down to like anything, like, I understand the framing, and I understand the like kind of zooming out. I understand the retelling about individual people. The retelling about events, I think, is probably the most glaring issue I had with it. All of this being said, I still enjoyed it, even if it's only because I like found out about some stuff that I didn't really know about, that I kind of want to like dive down those rabbit holes now. I do think it's just interesting, like, the, like, when Hell's Angels was founded in Montreal, then there's, like, the idea of the, like, multiple gang wars that have happened, and then, like, the other organized crime that exists also just like the history of biker gangs in general, because going from all of the little biker gangs that existed and then the founding of Hell's Angels was like a huge switch in like biker gang. I hesitate to call it culture because I feel like the culture didn't. The culture changed too, I think. But kind of like their purpose almost. Like when it was, like the Popeyes and I forget the other ones because the Popeyes is the one that Eve Trudeau was a part of. It was like about like getting together, drinking beer, having sex, doing actually like maybe doing drugs, but drugs becomes like a very different thing once it becomes like the like higher organized crime of Hell's Angels. Like that's the big switch is like it goes from like tomfoolery, ever so slightly criminal tomfoolery into like organized crime. And like I don't know, that like switch I think is really interesting, and I'd love to like learn more about like the time before because obviously we focus a lot on Trudeau like becoming a Hell's Angel and then becoming one of the filthy few. Yeah, there were also some sentences that I, as an editor, I went, well, I would have written that different. But I'm probably gonna find those in like most books. And again, like this might be like a stylistic thing because again, like this book is like far more journalism than it is, like I guess a creative nonfiction. It's kind of like the difference between a biography and a memoir almost. And this is more on the biography side of it. And I mean, I guess it kind of is a biography. Since in theory, that's the other thing is I feel like there could have been more Trudeau backstory. I feel like this is probably just like actually a lack of knowledge. He probably didn't like tell many people about growing up, but there are like a couple of like a couple of sentences that kind of like nod to like what his childhood was like, but I feel like we very often get like some sort of interview with parents or old friends or like somebody who like knew him well before he became the big criminal that he is. And we didn't really get that in here either. Yeah, so I feel like this isn't a bad book. I feel like if this was a book that was for me, probably call it a 4. But because it's like not really for me, it's not a style that I think I loved. Probably like a 3. I'm willing to maybe give it a 3.5. I always feel like 3 is so low. And like I did enjoy it. I did finish it. I just think it could have been different and was maybe like framed in a way that like made me think I was getting one thing and got something slightly different. Not quite as badly as this one. But yeah, apparently this was a month of like not framed well books. So I went in with expectations that weren't fulfilled, and that kind of like dampened my enjoyment of the books, I think. I do think that's the end. The book that I have now started is The Hunger Games. I know, it's crazy that I am the ripe old age of 32? I don't know, 30 something, 32 or 33 or something like that. And I haven't read The Hunger Games. It was, it was big when I was a kid, but I was reading different books, I guess. And I didn't read this one. And I've read the first chapter of it, and I actually am like very upset that I didn't read it earlier. I think it's relatively well written so far. And just the first chapter, it could change. The first chapter is either going to be like, it's very likely to be your best chapter because you've worked on it for the longest. Anyways, that's besides the point. That's what I'll be reading next. I'm not sure what comes after that. I'm thinking Devolution. We will see. Let me know what you read in July, what's coming up for you in August. Hope you enjoyed my rants. Hope you had fun. I had a blast. Catch you next time. Bye. Squeaky Squeak Squeakerson. Or the unknown fuck. You're very cute. Yeah.